Well, hello everyone, and welcome to this episode of About Performance, the Lives of Actors. Episode 4, Do You Need a Day Job? I'm Dr. Mark Seaton, and my guests this evening are Dr. Robin Dixon in Australia and Dr. Ross Pryor in the UK. Just before we get underway, reminder that if you want to use a hashtag for this episode or any of the others, it's #LivesOfActors. And if you wish to follow me, I'm at Sense Connection. Also, if you'd like to chat during our episode, please feel free to chat in your message on the bottom right hand of your screen. But can I encourage you, if you would like to ask a question, that you select where you can select the option to ask a question, to select that, and that will bring up a red highlighted question on the side screen so we can recognize it more immediately. And I welcome your questions throughout. We may interrupt the conversation if we see questions pertinent, but others will save a lot of the questions for near the end. So without further ado, I'm going to now bring myself on camera without too much difficulty, and there we go. Right, and so welcome to everyone, and I'd like to now introduce you to Robin Dixon. Hi Robin, how are you?
Hi Mark, I'm well, thank you.
Good to see you. Actually, while I've got you here, I might ask, perhaps if you just tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're working, what you're currently doing.
Okay, so I'm currently teaching at NIDA, which is the National Institute of Dramatic Art. That's in Kensington in Sydney, Australia. It's not a huge institution, probably a undergraduate student body of about 150, give or take, and a small number of staff teaching across many cohorts. Those cohorts include acting, design, stage management and technical theatre, costume, staging, construction of properties and objects. Today I'll be talking mainly about the relevance of what I do teaching-wise with the acting cohort. The courses that I teach, along with my colleague Dr. Chris Hay, who can't be in this discussion tonight, are more or less history courses around the history of performance and theatre, that also introduce some cultural studies theory, look at the history of dramatic forms in Western performance, but also look at some non-Western and contemporary performance forms. So it's a kind of introduction of academic material to what's otherwise squarely a practice-based conservatorium institution. And I guess the paper that, that I co-wrote with Dr. Chris Hay is about that, the experience of teaching academic coursework within an institution that is explicitly framed as a conservatoire.
Great, thanks Robin. And Ross Pryor, great to have you with us from the UK. Perhaps you can let everyone know where you're from and what you're doing.
Thank you, Mark. Yes, I'm currently Associate Professor here at the University of Northampton in England. I head up a program, or two programs actually, one in drama, the other in actor training, so it's a BA Honours in acting. We were one of the first institutions in the United Kingdom to offer a BA Honours acting. So we had to pioneer and navigate all of those early considerations. Running a conservatoire program outside of the traditional conservatoire system, whatever that might mean now, of course. The landscape's changed enormously, even in the last 4 or 5 years here in Britain. So, so that's what I do administratively, and also research-wise, I'm very interested in the knowledge that actor trainers possess, how they convey that to each other, how they convey that to students as well, and I'm particularly interested in the health aspect of actor training as well.
Great. Thanks, Ross. Great to have you with us to be a part of this conversation. So without further ado, I'm going to sort of open up our discussion around this particular chapter by Robin and by Chris. entitled The Academic Lives of Student Actors. And I was particularly interested, Robin, that you start right at the beginning of your chapter with a confronting comment, I think, from 1958 by a dean at the University of New South Wales. He said, I believe, elements such as mime and dancing or practical stage work do not seem to be of academic character. That's a bit discouraging when a university is thinking of maybe having training of creative arts practitioners. I mean, how does this claim strike you as you begin to examine contemporary acting schools?
Well, I think when Morven Brown said this in 1958, he was articulating what's actually a very commonly held position still, and something that's directly or indirectly influenced the development of the conservatorial model and the development of the situation we now see developing, where particular institutions are adopting a more university-based way of dealing with actor training, introducing some of the language of the university into a conservatorium. I think Morven Brown articulated this idea that the two approaches are fundamentally incompatible, which is pretty much what everyone's now trying to find ways around, circumventing this notion that there is a deep incompatibility between something like mime and something like essay writing, or that you can apply the same techniques in pedagogy to both teaching of fencing for actors and stage combat and to the teaching of theatre history. And this is a challenging and confronting quote. I think that the majority of the work I do here, and both conceptually and practically, is attempting to challenge the way that this quote is actually being formulated, challenge the idea that the two modes of teaching or of learning are fundamentally incompatible. But that said, there are big differences in the way that students relate to learning mime and the way that students relate to learning theatre history or post-colonial theory. And I think an awareness of those differences, not one that sees them as incompatible, but one that sees them as different sets of skills that are valuable in different ways, is very important as we're building these sorts of material into the curriculum.
Great. Now, you particularly were focusing on the National Institute of Dramatic Arts as your area of critique for this particular chapter. Could you perhaps say a few words about where, like, NIDA is one of the oldest schools in Australia. Could you give us, because lots of people don't know where NIDA fits in the scheme of other more recent schools that have emerged in Australia, could you give us a bit of background on that?
So there are 3 conservatorium institutions that teach dramatic arts that are more or less on the same level or at the same level of notoriety, that carry the same cachet, and those are VCA in Melbourne, WAPA, the Western Australian Academy of Performing Arts in Perth, and NIDA. And these 3 institutions are kind of the predominant institutions teaching drama and dramatic art in the country. There are a host of smaller institutions now as well that are operating in kind of a similar field, but less so, and those include the Australian Actors Centre, a couple of new institutions that have just been set up in inner city Sydney. AIM is now doing some classes, that's the Australian Institute of Music. So there are a few other institutions as well that are offering similar, broadly similar course material or claiming to be able to teach acting as a skill. But they don't usually get mentioned in the same breath as that trinity of NIDA, WAPA and VCA, I think because their approach is quite different and they don't have the same longevity as these big institutions do.
Right, and again, we did mention, I think a few weeks ago, WAPA's the Western Australian Academy of Performing Arts,
right,
and VCA, the Victorian College of the Arts. Ross, I might go also over to you to give us a context for what kinds of institutions exist in the UK across the different sectors, both the more recognised conservatoire institutions and the ones that are appearing or are linking up with universities. Would you care to give us some thoughts on that?
Yes, thanks, Mark. Well, obviously, the context here is a little different to Australia. It's a much bigger scene here. There are many, many drama schools, conservatoires, taking in vast numbers of students. And as I sort of preempted earlier, universities are now entering the game of actor training. So there are now a number of universities here who offer a BA Honours in acting. Of course, the conservatoires grew out of a history that is rather interesting, which, if you want to read about, it's in my book in a bit of detail. But it was basically anyone started a drama school. That was if you were an actor who wanted to share some of your skills, a way of making money, you started a drama school. And that's how most of the drama schools here in the UK began. They grew in size, grew in popularity and kudos, and therefore, am I still connected? Yeah?
Yes, yes.
Okay, that's good. I'm seeing things flashing before me.
All right.
And so they grew in size, popularity, and they were more formalized as time went on. In the last 10 to 15 years, we've seen, well, it's been more like 10 years, a lot of those have been collapsing and being merged into universities. So universities have taken them over structurally. They were awarding degrees, post-actor training, as it was in Australia. It was that 2-year concept diploma. And then they moved to becoming a 3-year degree. That mainly happened as a result of the collapse of the repertory system. Most graduates would get a job in the rep, so after 2 years of training, you would then go into the repertory company, and you would be doing production. The 3rd year in most actor training programs now replicates that experience that you would have had in the rep. So it's production, and a professional kind of model, really. So that's the history behind that. So, as I say, most of the drama schools now are owned and operated by universities here in this country. They tend to sit a little separately and are respected separately. The contact hours, which is the key difference between traditional university education and conservatoire education, is vast. So you're looking at over 30 hours of contact time, teaching time, then rehearsals in a conservatoire environment. Universities tend to offer fewer than half those hours of class time, as you know. So there is a tension. It's a big debate. We might resume that debate in the course of this program today.
Yeah, thanks, Taras. In fact, that's a nice segue for Robin. I think the next part of our looking at the themes that you explored in your chapter in this publication. In particular, you were looking really at a kind of a history of the changes in the way NIDA structured its learning experiences for the students. Would you like to take us through some of those, what you think are some of the key turning points, and maybe some of the rationale that you perceive behind them?
Sure. There have been all sorts of shifts since the founding of the institution in the 50s. I think a couple of the most important are that the NIDA institution was originally more or less conceived as a theatre company, which had a building and a theatre at its disposal, and was in the business of training actors into a particular system of performance that wasn't exactly like the repertory system that Ross was talking about, that wasn't a billion miles away. There was a very clear understanding of the kind of work that these actors would be getting. So NIDA functioned as a theatre company. The director of the institution was also the manager of that theatre company. Several of the individuals in the role equivalent to my current role were given titles like literary manager or dramaturg, rather than associate lecturer and convener of performance practices. So there was very much the conception of these individuals as being part of the day-to-day running of an active theatre company rather than of a training institution. And the work of the training institution was not exactly secondary, but was understood as directed entirely towards the purpose of performance. And that's been a gradual and steady conceptual shift over the last 50 years, that now, yes, the students do work towards performances, but those aren't actually the be-all and end-all of their training here. And instead, the focus is much less on that showcase moment and instead on the 3 years of work up to that moment. Otherwise, the way that training of actors particularly has been conceptualized has varied quite a bit. As we note in our paper, it's not exactly it can't be easily summarized as back in the 50s there was no academic material and now there's plenty, and it's been a steady increase in the introduction of history and theoretical material into the syllabus. Instead, it's been a bit of ebb and flow. There's been shifts in emphasis across the years that have largely depended on current staffing here. So if there are staff members who have a keen interest in theatre history or in art history, then often they're given chances to teach that to the students. If there are staff members who are much more practically focused and are interested in teaching stage combat, juggling, commedia dell'arte, then perhaps that's given more focus. And it's only been comparatively recently that these kind of shifts in emphasis that have been possibly a little more ad hoc and more reactive across the course of the last 50 years have been given a very clear conceptual framework and a qualification that attaches to that, and have been brought into line with external forces in the tertiary education sector here. So I think in terms of summarizing any further, it's probably just best to read the paper, really. But the general shift is definitely of the institution as purely a theatre company that does work and is in the business of training actors, into a more broad concept of the institution where it's not just actors who are being trained, where there's a whole set of other skills being communicated in pedagogy, and where the performances aren't the only way for, aren't the thing to which all training is directed.
Right. So what I particularly find interesting in my reading of the chapter is that you talk about there has been in the past work in a kind of sense almost in opposition to the more things that might be associated with the universities, that NIDA sets itself apart. We are not like universities, we are not like that kind of thing. We're very practically oriented. And this is a very naive, perhaps a polarizing of practical versus theoretical. I don't want to suggest that that's what it is, but the perception of students might be that now more of the NIDA programming seems to read or sound like it fits into a university context. Do you think that has an impact on how students experience themselves training for a career as an actor, that there might be that different perception?
Definitely, or at least it has the potential to lead to that difference in perception. And a crucial step in that process has been that we don't give students a diploma, or students don't just leave the building at the end of their third year and sort of, now you're an actor because you went to NIDA. Now they get given a Bachelor of Fine Arts. They're actually given a document, a qualification, which draws from a university understanding of how qualifications work. And students tend to understand that on some level now, that they are working, the most obviously or overtly university-like elements of their training here are those which place things into a logical order and a progression that's equivalent to those in other institutions, which then allows them to be given a qualification. So I think it does affect student experience, but there's definitely still a challenge that lies in that sort of overcoming of or dealing with that perception that the intellectual or academic side of training and the practical or physical side of training are somehow incompatible, or much work needs to be done to get those two elements to talk to each other. And the thing that we're finding more and more is that, of course, these aren't incompatible, that students can respond very, very physically or creatively or practically to theoretical material in the course of teaching. And that's definitely to be invited. But I think some of the opposition that might be identified in the past to adopting too overt a university model of education has been because of this perception that there's something fundamentally incompatible in a formal academic tertiary approach that a conservatorium shouldn't be adopting. And I guess in writing this paper I was hoping to challenge that perception, that I don't think there is a fundamental issue with introducing a type of pedagogy that has a place in university into this kind of context for all sorts of reasons.
Right. Ross, I might come to you now and get your thoughts on how in the UK these kinds of tensions have been negotiated, or maybe not negotiated, as you've mentioned, some institutions have had to come under or within a university structure. Has that been a painful transition, or have there been some pluses as well in making it such a transition?
I think, Mark, for a number of conservatoires, the shift possibly has been a little painful. And a lot of conservatoire principals knew that possibly in the future, by amalgamating with universities, may cause some tension for them because of the divide that there has traditionally been between practical programs and more perhaps academic programs, if you want to put it that way. But economics pay probably the greatest leverage in all of this, that to survive, these drama schools, small drama schools, really had to amalgamate.
Oh.
So on with their own business. In others, there's been more intervention by the particular host university. So without naming names, there are stories. There are lots of stories, and I think we're still seeing the effects of that now, actually, because it hasn't been that long ago where this sort of shift occurred. But I think what it has done is challenged everyone's notion of what it means to be, an actor. There are many cases of actors who did a drama degree in a university who have gone on to have very successful careers. Conversely, there are many who have trained in conservatoires who have not gone on to have successful careers and have abandoned their careers entirely in acting. I think what the conservatoire model does offer, though, is that intensity of training and the breadth of training that you won't get with limited contact hours in a traditional drama program in a university. And there's an ethos difference as well. Certainly work that we all do, if it's not grounded in some sort of theory that informs the practice, may be questionable. Practice informs theory informs program. What's at the end of the day, actors who can act, who can sustain themselves in a career in acting, because that's why they go into it. It's incredibly sexy, though, to offer a BA honours in acting. And, Robin will know, I know, the many hundreds and thousands who audition to get a place in one of those programs. We have to choose the best of those who come to us. We do that selection. But we are turning away hundreds and thousands of candidates who either we don't see have that immediate potential, or who could fit into what we offer, our style of working. they will go on and get a place probably in a university drama program. They may still hold on to their aspirations to become actors. It's not up to us, I guess, to say whether they will or won't. So it's a pretty difficult business. It's not easy, and it's vexed. I think there are people that become quite hostile when we start talking about these issues.
Right, thanks, Ross. I guess for what strikes me also is that for those who certainly aspire and are well equipped by their conservatoire training to work as an actor, they have the skills. Then there is, of course, the challenge of finding the work, and particularly, or more so perhaps in Australia than in the UK, I don't know, but certainly in Australia the options for work can be very limiting, and so there comes a point where those qualifications are also useful to perhaps be a foundation or a support for parallel careers that allow them to be earning income from their skill set to support them while they also pursue opportunities that they have to act. I'd be interested from both of you, but perhaps first from Robin, where do you see that perhaps the introduction of those critical thinking skills and so on within a university context can make a difference to enable a person trained to be an actor to have a broader range of options for a career, whatever that looks like, beyond the training they do as an undergrad?
Well, I think this is kind of the central question of everything I do at this institution. And for me, it's very simple. A conservatorium has an ethical responsibility, and I don't think that's putting it too strongly. A conservatorium has an ethical responsibility to ensure that an actor who graduates doesn't just have a narrow sense of their potential as a creative artist, or a narrow sense of their potential as, a human being with critical thinking skills and skills in collaboration and skills in communication, but that a conservatorium include some elements of teaching. They don't have to dominate, they don't have to be a major part of the timetable or the syllabus, but include some course material that train an actor in different ways of thinking and being, and that's potentially crucial to their future career, both as an artist and outside a narrower conception of what an actor can do when they graduate with a BFA acting from NIDA or a comparable institution. So I really firmly believe that it's kind of in the current climate, particularly in this country, where, yes, graduating from NIDA is absolutely no guarantee of future success. Many of our graduates go on and are immensely successful. Many successful actors in Australia aren't graduates of one of these institutions, and many graduates of our institutions don't go on to act. It's just exactly what Ross identified before. But I think we are failing our students if we don't provide them with at least some insight, some basic set of generic skills that are more firmly located in a kind of academic realm. Although, as I said before, I don't see them as exclusively mental or theoretical or in that particular space. But providing them with those skills, even just at an introductory level, can actually be crucial as they leave the institution and go elsewhere.
And Ross, what do you think about this equipping actors with other skills to support them in terms of a holistic career? What's your thoughts?
Yes, well, of course, it's incredibly unsexy for those students to be thinking about doing anything other than acting. They don't really want to know that. They want to. They see themselves as entering the industry. So the minute you start talking about this, it's almost sounding as though it's second best. A defeatist mentality comes over them. It's very interesting. I have seen this in third year, where students start to get so panic-stricken, and the reality of this career that's only months away, is looming. Some of them either they go full throttle towards that career, or others pull right back and become deflated and feel it's all too difficult, you know. So I've seen that happen. It's I mean, it's very, very sad, but that's the reality of it. Of course, you know, this business is very good at training people who then go on to train other actors. So, you know, their skill sets perpetuates really in the training of others. We see that constantly. There's a whole business that surrounds, you know, people engaging. We live in an amazingly performative era. We've never seen anything like this before. So, on the one hand, the traditional routes to getting jobs is diminishing. Robin is correct in sort of foreshadowing that. But on the other hand, we've got this whole media, opening up of the media, where people can be more performative than they've ever been able to be seen by people in a way they've never been seen before. And there are real possibilities with that. The gaming industry, video games, that technology is booming. So whereas we're seeing fewer actors on the live stage, which is what the conservatoire always prepared people for, in honesty, we're now moving to perhaps looking at preparing people, actors, you know, to voice and to image, you know, these gamed, you know, images of themselves. So it's rapidly changing, a rapidly changing world. How we're responding to that as institutions and our curricula, that is a question to be asked, I think.
That's great, Ross. And Robin, in a moment, I'll if you have any comments about that aspect of how institutions are responding to the changing technological climate and the changing opportunities for actors. But I guess a question that comes to my mind related to this is that I think it's often that people who are attracted to an acting career are those people who at high school loved doing things rather than just reading things. They loved performing, they loved engaging with other people, collaborating, being creative. They were not the sit at a desk and read and write type of people. And that is certainly supported when they come to a drama school, where so much of the teaching and the training is that practical stuff, that it's one attracts the other. The kind of students who would be more studious, more book-oriented and reading and writing-oriented, aren't the ones who are necessarily going to be attracted. What do you think might need to shift if the academic skills that are potentially useful for them in a career, and as Ross said, sometimes they really don't want to think about their career, but it's still important that they might have these skills. How do you think that is or isn't being negotiated? That's a big question.
Yeah. I think firstly, it's interesting to me that there is this common perception that most people arriving at drama school auditioning will be this kind of it's a slightly a stereotype, but they'll be extroverted, very keen on practical work, not so much focused on book learning, you know, that sort of thing. In my experience, and I've taught here for 3 years now, and so I've seen several different cohorts of actors go through. That might be true of some actors in every class, but it definitely won't be true of all actors. And we actually tend to get a widespread of people who have been selected as being of a kind of elite quality already, that we take, I think, around 1% of applicants. So they're people who have already gone through a rigorous process. But many of our finest actors are academically very gifted, come in with extremely high HSC scores. That's the high school certificate, Ross, our final, I think it's our A-level equivalent. And they're definitely not this stereotype of the class clown who's immensely charismatic but doesn't really apply themselves to their studies. So every year we get many actors who actually fall into an entirely separate category. And really the teaching's not so much about dragging students who have no curiosity or aptitude for academic material, kicking and screaming into some sort of engagement with that stuff. Instead, it's about finding a register of teaching and a register of discussion that suits both students who really struggle with the more theoretical approach and students who find it immensely easy and even boring if we're going over simple things. So it's a challenge, and it's one of the biggest challenges here, but also one of the biggest, it's also extremely worthwhile. It's one of the things that I really enjoy about this work, that we're not actually fighting against an attitude in the vast majority of the student body that this stuff is useless or boring. It's not sexy, and Ross is right about that. But occasionally we will find ourselves inspiring curiosity and engagement with this sort of material. And I see actors graduate and choose work that we've considered in our classes, or look at plays that would not otherwise be even considered, but they've managed to study it as part of their work through our coursework. So I think that's all really interesting and kind of worth thinking about when we think about the sort of person who's doing this coursework. I think that answers the first part of your question, but maybe not the second.
That's okay. Do you want to say something about the second part, which is about the changing, I guess, industrial landscape, new technologies, video gaming opportunities? Yeah.
So Ross is very correct. The traditional conservatorium model kind of adopts a hierarchical model of theatre making. It's very focused towards stage performance. There's less, definitely not no, but less attention given to new media performance, devised work, verbatim and documentary performance, all that sort of, all those alternative approaches to making performance work. That's kind of a traditional conservatory model, and it's definitely the case here that in the past has been how an actor's work was conceptualized, that it is directed towards a particular understanding of hierarchical repertory performance. But obviously this is one of the most exciting spaces for young actors opening up now, making their own content, doing group devised work that takes the form of short films that are uploaded to YouTube as a web series, forming their own theatre company and working on verbatim material. And then, of course, the whole video game aspect as well. It's still something that this institution is finding a challenge to incorporate, and some of that's being done in the subjects I teach. We're attempting to teach an introduction to collaboration in technological media, introduction to collaboration in cross-cultural work and intercultural work. So again, it's just providing students with a whole set of other skills that we may not be offering the final word in those skills. It might just be an introduction. But ideally, eventually, if a student has to, or is forced to, chooses to, adopt some of these alternative approaches to performance making, some of the material they learn in their Bachelor of Fine Arts at NIDA becomes useful to them. That'd be the hope, really, there. But I agree, I think that the technological aspect particularly is one that the conservatorium model in general should make a lot more effort to engage with, because just on the ground, this is where a lot of graduate actors are going to get work in a way that they didn't 5 years ago.
Okay. And Ross, at the University of Northampton, your experience of diversity of students engaging with the courses as Robin had, do you want to add any comments around that?
Yeah, look, I absolutely want to echo what Robin has said. He's quite right. The class clown, the extrovert, isn't necessarily going to make a great actor. And in fact, the program, the UCAS tariff points that students get coming in tend to be higher than most other programs in the university. So they're not, I mean, they're bright. They are generally very, very bright students. And I guess it's how we classify, brightness and knowledge, and they have. We look for actors, as I'm sure Robin does, who are not just people who want to do, but we need to see that they're actors who can be. They need to be able to become whoever they're wanting to become. We need to see the interactions. It's got to be there at audition. If it's not, that's probably not something we're going to be able to teach them. So they are bright and they're up for it. So we need to dispel that myth. I think sadly in school, teachers might see the class clown as being someone who is theatrical, and they tell them, you should become an actor, and I think that's slightly misguided sort of career advice, because by and large, school teachers don't come from the tradition of actor training. They haven't been actors, most of them, in that sense themselves. So, yeah, I mean, we're up against that sort of mythology as well. We're responding to new technologies. One time, conservatoire programs did not offer acting for camera. It wasn't there in the syllabus. And it's only been in more recent years that it's become a part of the curriculum in most acting programs. So now we're looking at going a step beyond that and looking at the new technologies and making links between programs as well. Games, art programs. How can they link with those sorts of programs within the university as well? Great.
Thanks for that, Ross. What I'd like to now look at is in a related area, as that was discussed in the article, is the question of taste making that you bring up, Robert, in the article, where you're talking about the way in which the training program, say at NIDA, identifies a particular group of texts that become kind of like the Western canon, Shakespeare, kind of obviously, plus Ibsen and Chekhov and various other writers. So there's a taste-making process that if these young acting students haven't come across these works, these are the ones they should regard as of some quality. But I noted in your chapter there was, for example, no discussion of screenplays as another kind of taste-making exercise. What are the good screenplays that have been written, granted that they incorporate other elements which a theatre actor is not traditionally used to engaging with? Would you like to say something about this taste-making process and what you think is working or not working in that?
So any course like the courses I teach, which revolve around some history of theatre and history of great scripts, will involve a selection of texts. Though that selection of texts is inevitably influenced by the kind of taste of the people who are selecting the texts. Even if they're trying very hard to operate outside of the bounds of their own taste, there will be some kind of influence in there. We tend to think of ourselves as, I'm speaking on behalf of myself and Chris.
And Chris, yes.
And Chris, yeah. We tend to think of ourselves as not offering the sort of definitive list of plays that you must read, this is the Western canon, but instead providing a bit of a tasting platter for students. So we include several canonical works on that list, but also several less canonical works. We're just discussing, just this week, our tragedy course for next year, and we've taken the unprecedented step of taking Hamlet off that course and putting John Ford's 'Tis Pity She's a Whore on instead. So that's the only work of Jacobean Elizabethan tragedy the students will read formally in that semester. And that's going to be a big risk because, oh my God, Shakespeare's not on the syllabus anymore. But yeah, it's a risk that we definitely made for all sorts of reasons. So there's that. So there'll always be some taste-making aspects. And we tried really just to provide students with a whole range of material, some of which we choose for them. But a lot of our assessment revolves around them actually making those selections themselves. So choosing plays or screenplays, actually, that they think they can talk about in the context of the material we've been considering. One thing that I've noticed with this kind of teaching model is that it introduces students to works that they otherwise wouldn't have bothered with. And one thing really interesting with training actors is that some actors come into NIDA having read the complete works of every Western dramatist you could name, and they're really, really familiar, intimately familiar with dozens of scripts. And others come into NIDA never having read a play, really. They had a look at a couple of monologues, but they've never really sat down and read a work of drama like that. And so again, we're dealing with a vast range of experience with this. And we give students a taste of a whole set of different things. What I also want to say there is that sometimes they're pleasantly surprised by their experience in that. So, for instance, last week we taught The Ham Funeral. This is a famously thorny work of mid-20th century Australian modernism by our only Nobel Prize winner for literature, Patrick White. Not the sort of play that most students would happily pick up. It's dense, it's reasonably difficult, it's very, very different to everything else we've been reading in Australian drama history in that semester. And yet the number of students who respond really positively to this play, who love the language, who are really excited by the creative propositions in it, the proposals that White offers for creatives. And I think that's a really good thing that the canon is still useful for, that this isn't strictly a canonical work, but it is one that has a kind of legacy now. And being able to teach that is, I think, in general, a good thing. In terms of screenplay, it's kind of a tough one for this institution because NIDA is the National Institute of Dramatic Art, and traditionally that's very much been focused on stage performance.
Right.
Third-year actors do a unit in screen where they are trained on acting for the camera, where they're trained on some elements of screenplay writing and basic film theory. But in general, that hasn't been a central part of the curriculum here. In the last, in our new BFA program, Chris and I have brought in a screenplay or a work of film in every semester. It's just one work as opposed to several, but at least it's nodding towards the fact that there's this entire genre of performance that does need to be considered in this context. And students in their assessments are given a lot of scope for choice in assessment as well. So we're very, very keen for students to, when they're talking about tragedy, not just look at Hamlet, but instead look at Old Boy, the Korean film, or look at the American Western as an example of revenge tragedy, that kind of thing. So actually incorporating genre and form questions that are relevant to screenplays into a broader discussion of dramatic art in general. And that's, for me, an ongoing process, because the more I can put screenplay and film material into this course material, I think the better we're preparing actors for different types of reading and engaging with material.
Right. And Ross, can I ask you similarly the engagement with, in terms of shaping tastes, what kind of curriculum choices you're making at the University of Northampton, and are screenplays featuring at all in this program?
The study of screenplays, not so much, no. There's very, time is a pressure, obviously, and a selection of plays, whatever they are, is going to be very limited. You know, in an ideal world, this is my kind of view, really. It would be best if actors had done a literature degree first, who had studied a range of texts for 3 years, and soaked up a whole lot of issues, debated issues, written about issues, read about issues, you know, poetry, and contemplated all of that and had some life experience, and then set out to do their actor training. I think we would see a much better graduate, actually. But in the systems that we now work in, where the students are paying the sort of money that they're paying, they're 17, 18, straight out of school and straight into their actor training. So it's very, very problematic, very difficult. So the selection of texts is tricky. I guess, you know, someone once said to me, if you only teach young actors how to present television commercials, they won't be able to do Shakespeare. But if you teach them how to do Shakespeare, they'll be able to do their television commercial.
Yeah.
So it's very difficult. I think there is something to be said for a tutor choosing a text that they are passionate about. You know, you're not going to cover a great breadth in the time that you've got in those 3 years. I mean, let's face it. However, I think if you teach a process, that's why I'm a lot more interested in andragogy than pedagogy. So andragogy, that is the adult learning way of learning rather than teaching children pedagogy. If you teach them a process, a way to access texts, to go further, go deeper, then you're doing the job, no matter what the text particularly is. But I think it's our responsibility to stretch students.
Great. Thanks for that, Ross. I'd like to see we're getting a bit of chat, which is great, and we'll come to that question shortly. But just to kind of round up our engagement with the chapter, at one point towards the end of the chapter, Robin, you raised the question about the question of students knowing the lineage of acting, the kind of history of actor training. How useful do you think that may be for actors to know where they're coming from, or as they go out into the industry and maybe do further training and pick up other schools of thought? Would you like to say something about the relative value of student actors learning about the lineage of acting? And I'll be asking Ross that question too. But first, to you, Robin.
Sure. I think it is very important. This is not an institution where a particular acting style is taught a method, or a capital M method for that matter. Instead, actors are given a broader range of skills that draw on different lineages of practice. So they do Lecoq mask work, but they also do more classic understanding of voice work. So there's a bit of variety happening there. But I think it's very important that actors do understand the history of their form and their practice. For a couple of reasons. Firstly, because if you are self-identifying as an artist, being able to articulate exactly where you are placed in that continuum of creative art is quite useful. Secondly, because if you want to be a radical artist making radically new work, creative interventions that really, really change the face of theatrical or film performance, and a lot of actors do genuinely want to have some kind of long-term effect on the world, which is wonderful, but I don't think you can do that without understanding what's been done before. You can't do that. If you want to avoid reinventing the wheel every generation, there has to be an understanding of the developments that happened in the 20th century, that there was a whole school of melodrama in the 19th century here that still has effects on the way that soap opera performances work, that sort of thing. So identifying those lineages of practice, both as something to be kind of proud of and aware of, and something to react against, I think is quite crucial for the developing actor. Even if it's never, after being acknowledged and understood, even if it's never explicitly articulated again, I think it's still a really valuable part of the training process.
Great, thanks. Ross, and then we'll probably go to some questions as we continue.
Yeah, look, I agree with Robin, but again, it's incredibly unsexy for a lot of these students who want to be actors. I have brought in some amazing speakers to students to do exactly that, to talk about the history of acting, because I think if it's going to be your profession, the least you could do to honour it is to understand the origins of it, so that you know how to serve that profession as well, But bringing in some incredible speakers, some very engaging speakers. It's interesting how some students were turned off by that. They didn't want to know about it. They saw that it was irrelevant to them, that it was a waste of their time. And that's a sad, sad attitude and reflection, I think. But I think we should still plod on, even if it doesn't take up vast amount of our time. I still think it's important to know the history of your profession. And of course, you can get a 12-year-old who's going to be a big star, who's never done any actor training, who will, get rave notices, who won't understand anything of the history of their profession, who'll go out there and be able to do it. And sadly, I guess that's what our acting students sometimes see, these success stories going out there doing it, and they just want to be doing it now, I mean, you mention names like Marcel Marceau to students now, and they look at you quizzically, wondering who on earth was Marcel Marceau?
Yeah. I think
for me the question is
there, because I'm keen that we will now some of our participants in the room. I think first of all we'll pick up this comment observing that the conservatorium or the conservatoire can be seen as very much a hothouse atmosphere. That particularly when it was separate from the university, that everybody was in it together, doing their creative work, and that's all people lived and breathed and talked about. But there's been suggestions that when a conservatoire is positioned within a university and perhaps students have to do university subjects alongside their particular discipline subjects, that this gives them a broader education and also a broader life experience. So the question I think that's emerging from that is there's the hothouse environment or the atmosphere of a conservatorium, but is there something to be said for not having that or altering that hothouse so that it has a broader experience or gives a broader experience to the student? If you had a chance, for example, to redesign the conservatorium system, our questioner asks, what might you change? What might you renew? Would you start from the ground up? So there's a few things you may like to bounce off there. I'm going to let either of you take over who speaks first to rather than nominate someone.
Well, I can't talk for the hothouse, so maybe if let me just talk. Yeah, Robin can talk about the hothouse. I'll talk about actor training within a university context, I guess, very briefly. Our acting students don't take other subjects from other areas, so it's not a liberal arts program at all. It is still actor training. It's 30-odd hours of contact a week within the university. But the difference is, and something that the students themselves comment on, is that they're mixing with other students, in the CAF or socially, even in the halls of residence. Sometimes that's fantastic for them. Other times, because the students in the halls may have a different work schedule, they may not be in warm-ups at 8 o'clock in the morning, for instance. They might be a fashion student who doesn't have a class till 2 in the afternoon or something like that, who has been out the night before, coming in the wee small hours of the morning, waking everyone up, that sort of thing. That causes attention. So there's some interesting social issues there. But very much they're still doing the same sorts of hours, which are unsociable, long hours, going into the evening with rehearsal as well. So perhaps over to Robin as far as the hothouse goes.
So this is definitely a big feature of conservatorium performance. Conservatoire training. This idea of the hothouse, and students here jokingly call it the NIDA bubble. It's this bubble that is somewhere on Anzac Parade, and students never leave the bubble, and you come into the bubble early in the morning, and you leave the bubble late at night, and you don't go down the road for lunch. You stay here and you eat in the cafe. And it's it is actually a strength of the conservatorium model if you're training a particular kind of creative who is immersed in the practice of what they're learning to do for several hours a day. And I can see why that's been such a dominant part of this entire model of teaching, because it encourages a kind of focus and a kind of all-encompassing attention to what it is that you're doing. It doesn't really allow for distraction by other students or other coursework or hell politics or other things outside of the institution. But of course, it's both a strength and a real weakness, because it can lend itself to what's seen of as this kind of suffocating hothouse atmosphere. It's a matter for individual students to negotiate a lot of the time. I think if the conservatorium model persists, this kind of institution depends in a large respect on the cultivation of that kind of atmosphere here, that students are making work, they are rehearsing, those rehearsals are happening late at night, they are here for many, many hours, they are doing multiple performance outcomes in a year, each of which are quite demanding on their time. And so the practical consequence of all of that is always that they're going to be in this building an awful lot and not leaving it and having other experiences outside in the world. So I can see it happening. It's always happened in this kind of place, I think. But it's a matter of the procedures that are put in place for helping students deal with that atmosphere, for helping them actually cross the road and go out to lunch. I sometimes get really funny looks because if it's a nice day, I'll pull my discussion class out and we'll go and sit in the park. And it'll just be a radically changed engagement with the students, and it gives them a chance to sit in the sunshine and talk about plays outside of a classroom. So that can really be helpful. But in general, I think unless the whole conservatory model is radically rehauled, these institutions are always going to cultivate at least some of that atmosphere of heavy focus and almost claustrophobic practice here. In terms of what I'd do if I was able to start the system again, look, it's a conservatoria, I think there are things that conservatoires do really well. I think there are things that are problematic for student mental health, for the ways in which students engage with the teaching material and the way that they learn, and in fact their agency as creatives. And I think that some of that's gradually changing for the better, but if I were redesigning the whole system, it'd be that stuff that I'd want to more or less start with. How do we make this a safe environment for students that nonetheless pushes and challenges them in all sorts of interesting ways? But I think I'll have to leave my grand plans for reconstructing the conservatorium there, I think.
That's great, Robin and Ross. Appreciate both your thoughts on that. So I'll move to our next question, and they're coming through now, which is great. So question, I think, for both of you. Given that many actors will be drawn to make their own work, either out of necessity or desire, how do you see the relationship between theatre making and acting in the training program?
So this is something I've definitely worked directly on addressing in this institution. Like I said before, that there traditionally, over the last 50 years, there has been a more conservative understanding of what acting training should be, and that's usually revolved around the more hierarchical model. Somebody writes a script that's given to a production team and a director, you audition, you stand on stage, you get told where to move and how to speak lines, you bow, everyone claps at the end, right? And that model is significantly changing now, and the questioner is right. A lot of actors are drawn to making their own work. A lot of them are kind of pushed in that direction because other opportunities are not forthcoming, and it's a really good way of ensuring that you will continue to perform, is making sure that you're performing in work that you're devising yourselves. So sometimes we have actors writing scripts and kind of moving into that model of actually they're becoming playwrights, which is wonderful, and obviously any kind of training we can give them in dramaturgy and reading a whole bunch of works of classic drama and working out what they like and what they don't, developing their own taste, developing a sense of style, all that's really crucial. In terms of the more contemporary aspect of performance, the group devised work, I think it's something that really needs to be incorporated into acting programs in general, that there should be an understanding that there's an entire world of performance making out there. There are ways of doing it. Those ways, like there are several competing strategies for that sort of work, but allowing actors in training to do that kind of work in the safer environment of a conservatorium, where they're not in the audience necessarily, they're able to experiment and fail and succeed and fail again. I think that is of definitely growing importance in this kind of institution, that actors need to be given the chance to make theatre and not merely deliver other people's lines. And a couple of the courses we've just introduced for the BFA here are intended to do that. I guess we'll see the ramifications of those courses in the future, but ideally they're giving at least an introduction to those skills.
Great, thanks, Robin. And Ross, do you have some thoughts on this relationship between theatre making and acting in the programs?
Yeah, indeed. So, we very much in the design of our program, we embedded it in there so that there is an element starting in first year, developing in second year, and into third year in a larger way, where there are opportunities to learn devising theatre-making processes alongside core traditional actor training. So it is there in our program. We are implementing a pathway now for those who want to engage in that in a more substantive way over their second and particularly third year. So that's something that will be coming on board next year in the program at Northampton. And there are a lot of conservatoires that do offer these sorts of theatre-making programs alongside their actor training programs. I guess, perhaps reading between the lines of what Robin said, there can be a lot of theatre making that can happen without necessarily learning some of those core acting skills, Stanislavski-based acting skills. And you see a lot of theatre making coming out of drama programs in universities, where they may not have the same requirements that perhaps an actor training program has. So there is, but I think we're handling that tension quite well in the way we're offering it within our program, and also offering that opportunity for those students who really want to engage that way. We've seen some very successful graduates really who can do that sort of work. So that was slightly pioneering on our behalf, I think, but it's a model that works, and we may see more of that rolling out in due course.
Great, that's great to hear about, Ross. And Ross, next question is actually directed firstly to you. That your earlier comment that teaching can be one of the outcomes for actors, that they can be teaching other actors. So the question is around, are student actors able to be involved with education students and learning those skills about education as part of their course, if they are to end up being potentially educators themselves of other actors?
Wow, fantastic question. There are a few aspects to this, I think, really. I think the first thing is that the actor training type, there's not a lot of room to move. If you're doing around 30 weeks or some do 35 weeks in a year of training, 30 hours or 32 hours a week, plus the rehearsals, time is limited to do some of that core business. However, I think learning those extra skills are really important. We offer a module in our third year that teaches the actors how to engage with, in other settings, in applied settings such as schools. They're taking Shakespeare into schools, and they have to learn workshop techniques, because not every actor can just go in and deliver a workshop, so they have to be taught how to conduct that, and work with young people. So we do have that in the program, and I guess that came out of a personal interest of mine, you know, in education as well. So I think that's there. In terms of teaching other actors, if we're talking about that, I think it's valuable that the actors who have graduated have gone on to have a professional career so that they know what it's like in the business and they can speak with some authority. They know what it's like to perform night after night after night. You know, knowing that is quite different to just reading about that or assuming that you know what it's like, and to negotiate the perils of working, you know, full-time as an actor, or trying to negotiating with agents and so forth. So all of those skills are really important in terms of the actor training. But I think there's great benefit in actors working in educational settings. Where do they learn to do that? Well, I think postgraduate degrees would be fantastic. It would be a fantastic opportunity to segue then into applying their skills and knowledge to working in education more generally. But as I say, we've sort of prepped a little bit of that in where we could into our third year, just to open up this possibility for our actors.
Great. And that might be a good point for me to segue to another question and giving opportunity if there are some still more questions. We've got another 15 minutes to go in our session tonight. But I guess I have a question with regard to the teachers who teach in conservatoire programs and university-based programs. Often they are drawn from the industry. So they, as Ross just said, they have that life experience of being a professional, and that's invaluable. But possibly what they don't have are some skills as teachers, as educators. And I wondered if either of you might have some observations about the challenges of either equipping practitioners with some skills in andragogy or pedagogy, depending on what frame you want to use, and what is perhaps changing in the higher education sector to address this question of actors receiving training from effective educators, not just, or not, I shouldn't say not just, but not practitioners alone. Either of you like to dive in on that one?
It's actually it's a very vexed question in general, because there is a kind of understanding that if you have a set of professional skills as a practitioner of particular creative art, then you are best placed to teach those skills. That understanding is definitely not flawed. There's a lot of evidence for that. But you're right, a lot of people in that position aren't necessarily trained teachers. A big part of the standardization of education in the tertiary system here has been that there's a more or less tacit understanding that if you're teaching at a bachelor's level, you should have a master's level qualification. If you're teaching at a master's level, you should have a PhD qualification. And that goes some way towards, of course, that doesn't actually talk about teaching necessarily, but it goes some way towards establishing a baseline that practitioners are expected to have before they get up in front of the classroom. Of course, having a master's level qualification is absolutely no guarantee you'll be a good teacher either. So there are all sorts of problems there in general. Otherwise, it's tough. There are practitioners who make wonderful teachers and others who lack the understanding of things like assessment and the kind of formal structures of andragogy, pedagogy that institutions depend on to keep running. And there's very little of that training that actually goes into training those practitioners in the first place. And a lot of that training is then done more or less on the job as you get better or worse at teaching after standing up in front of classrooms. I think building some of that into training programs is useful, but Ross is right. These programs are already completely packed full of other stuff that's arguably more useful for the actual thing that the individual is training towards. So it's a really tough question, and one that I think a lot of people struggle with on both sides of the equation here. People who have specialized in teaching like me, who I've got a creative practice, but it's a limited one. I'm not that active these days, and I don't practice as an actor. And I've concentrated on the teaching side of things. And then you have other staff, not necessarily here, but in general, other individuals who are definitely specialists in their creative practice, and teaching is a second or third priority because of the way that their career works. And I think negotiating some kind of a shared language, a shared set of priorities and understandings between people coming from those different angles is a crucial element of the modern conservatorium, because you will be having teaching staff drawn from a whole set of different contexts.
That's great, Rob. I find it's really helpful to kind of think about what's at stake and how that is practically negotiated. I'm aware in the UK there is one institution that is now offering a postgraduate certificate or something in the teaching of acting or teaching of theatre. Perhaps Ross, you may know of it or may have some other comments about that.
Yeah, there is. It's an MA actually, but
Right.
that's a London-based conservatoire. It's the rare exception, I must say, to this. There's a real need for focused programs at MA level, I think. There's a real push here in the UK to have teachers to have some sort of qualification, so postgraduate qualification in teaching, learning and teaching, and certainly in higher education. So there is that push. The HEA is also, through their fellowship scheme, is sort of recognising people as well. So there's a real push to people being recognised. So and they have to jump through a series of hoops and reflect right about themselves as teachers, teachers, really. There's a fantastic book, Mark, that
yes, we'll be promoting that.
yeah, a fantastic book that I came across that actually deals with this whole issue of the knowledge that yeah, that's right. That you've got to learn how to do advertisements as well, don't you, in this business? But it's there it is. The magic
I've
of
learned that too. So I'm not shy.
Not shy. You can hold it up, yes. But it's that I interrogate in there this whole language issue, that Robin mentioned, and perhaps negotiating the different languages. How sometimes we mean the same things, but we're using different terminologies. Dame Judi Dench, if you ask her how does she do what she does, she says, I don't have a clue. I can't tell you. She can't put it into words. So and some of the best, or the most high-profile actors, if they were asked to give a class, couldn't do it. Because teaching is not their skill set. They can talk probably anecdotally about experience, and actually you can learn by anecdote. That's not something to dismiss either. But in terms of having a process that's finely tuned, they can't do that. So there are skill sets. There's a place for everyone there, I think. But I still think there is certainly great value in having experienced the industry in some sort of real visceral way, tangible way, but that alone doesn't make you a great teacher. Well, I must say, everyone is a teacher. Everyone in this world is a teacher. We're going about our business teaching good things, bad things. We all teach. So I think, in terms of training actors, we want people to become autonomous. They have to think for themselves and people. And that's a hard job. Not everyone can do it as successfully, I don't think.
Thanks for that, Ross. And I should add that we will be certainly providing a link for that book that we both waved in front of the camera at the end of this session. Now, I've got another question. As noted, because the title for this program was "Do Actors Need a Day Job?" and that's often presumed to be that of a barista or retail worker. So the question is, how can we equip actors with skills broader skills that include marketing and running their own practices? In the first session, Ross and Robin, our guest speaker Ashley Marinaccio, said that actors making their own work are best served because they are both the creator of the work and then they're actually able to create the income through the promotion and the execution of that work. But interested in your thoughts about, has been looking at training, certainly training for a career, but are we also needing to train them for a workable lifestyle, I guess?
Yes, I think so. I think the idea that an actor can leave an institution like this, go straight into theatre or film work and be fulfilled in that theatre or film work for 30 or 40 years and then retire on their laurels after winning several Oscars. It happens for one or two people ever, but for the rest of our students, we're, again, failing them if we don't equip them with broader skills. And Ross mentioned earlier that this is a little bit of a defeatist, or can be perceived as a bit of a defeatist attitude, that implicit in that is the acknowledgement that shock horror, some graduates are not going to get full-time acting work. But I think we do have to acknowledge that, because if we maintain this illusion that getting this sort of qualification is all you need for a ticket to surefire success and fame as an actor, then we're doing our students a disservice. And for me, it's about these building into the general acting curriculum and syllabus material that allows actors to learn other skills, whether that's canny self-marketing or whether it's devising work themselves, or stage management, playwriting, dramaturgy. There's a plethora of theatrical and film-related skills that conservatorians should probably never give a definitive 3-year training in, but can at least offer as again that kind of tasting platter of this is the sort of thing that you could possibly find yourself leaning on later in your career. And I think that's actually a crucial thing that the modern conservatorium needs to do.
Great. Ross?
Yeah, I support what Robin says, and certainly I think every actor training program needs to have a component there, certainly in the 3rd year, that addresses these issues, teaches them how to get on in the business, what you need to do. You know, business planning is such an important thing. I mean, all actors need to know, something about accountancy, even if they don't lodge their own tax return, but certainly need to know how to keep their own records. They need to know how to plan their life and their career. So rather than just say, I'm just going to wing it, see what happens, see if luck is blowing my way, you really do need to plan for your own success and your own fortune and luck, really. So being a barista, well, that may be something as an option. But there may be, these actors actually have amazing skills. Now, in this country they pay £9,000 a year, for 3 years to be trained, £9,000 a year. So actually you want to have some return for that investment as well. So, that skill set that you graduate with is amazing. And, I would encourage actors not to be dismissive of what they can do. What can they do that others can't do? What does that 3 years equip them to do? So, to think beyond perhaps work that others could do that haven't had actor training for 3 years. I do come across out of work in London all the time, and in restaurants or pubs and places like that, or giving the programs, selling programs at theatres. And I can peg them straight away that they were actor trained. They have all those hallmarks of that. But what a disappointment that that's what they're having to do necessarily when they have a great skill set that they could apply in all sorts of ways, either related to the industry or not.
Yeah, that's oops. That's great, Ross.
Right.
I just wanted to ask of both of you one last question, if I may, as the host for this program. And I appreciate it's a delicate one, but I feel it needs to be asked, is that there have been stories for maybe 50, 60 years in places of actor training where students may experience humiliation or exploitation or bullying by teachers, by acting teachers in the course of their training experience, and they are the ones who may, and some students who suffer these experiences drop out of the course, and we don't track them, and the story goes, well, they aren't tough enough, they haven't got what it takes because the industry is as harsh and as violent as the experiences that they might meet in the drama classroom. That has always troubled me, and I know it's troubled you, Ross, and I suspect you, Robin. I guess, where might we see such teaching practices being held more accountable in this day and age that recognises that duty of care is a matter for places of higher education, including drama schools? Would either of you have a sense of how that duty of care could be better monitored and managed? It's a tough question, I appreciate, but I'd just be interested to know your thoughts, either of you. So,
I think this is another thing that can come into a conservatorium that has adopted some of the techniques and practices and institutions of a university. That many universities actually have good ways of dealing with. You know, they have harassment policies and bullying procedures and all this sort of thing. And I think any institution that concentrates on these kind of relationships between students and teachers probably needs to have formal procedures in place. And I think this is a case where the conservatorium can borrow really valuably from the university model, because universities have often been thinking about these questions a little bit longer. In terms of the question of staff, of students being at risk, I can't really comment on practices here, obviously, but I think in principle, of course, we all agree that it's appalling that a student could feel victimized or harassed out of an educational institution, and that staff in general need to be putting every effort into ensuring that the classroom is a space for experimentation, a space where failure is permissible, and a space where students in the development of their practice can try different things without feeling at risk.
That's great. Thanks, Robin. Ross, any thoughts?
Yeah, I guess very briefly. Yes, I mean, I have seen things done to students that I have felt very uncomfortable with, and I've observed classes around the world. However, failure is great. I think that experimentation, the risk needs to be there. I think we've become a little too safe at times in what we do, so that the outcomes are so predictable that there's no point in what we do. So I think the issue is that acting tends to be so psychologically based. Certainly, if we're looking at naturalism, it's a very tricky area, because yes, you want students to experience a range of emotions and feelings and get to that point, but I think it needs to be done certainly safely, and again, it comes back to, does the tutor have the required sort of knowledge and competency and qualification to be able to do some of this work? We don't want to have quasi sort of psychologists running around in our acting departments, do we?
Great. Thanks to you both for that. It's a tricky, delicate question, but I think it needs to be part of our ongoing conversation around the training and the well-being of actors in training. So as we come to the end, I've got a final short question for Ross. Really, it's about the journal that you edit. You're the editor of the Journal of Applied Arts and Health. Is that right? I should know. I'm on the editorial board. Could you perhaps just spend a few moments just to share with us what that journal is about, what it looks at, because we'll have people who will hear about the journal perhaps for the first time through this discussion would like to know more.
Oh, well, thank you for the question. Yes, the Journal of Applied Arts and Health, it's published by Intellect. It's an international journal, and we look at issues relating to health in its broadest sense, be it mental, physical health, social health, well-being, it's spiritual. It's actually quite broad, and it's looking at how the arts, all of the arts, can be used in different ways to be applied to those circumstances, to improve people's health, to combat particular issues related in and for health. And, the training of actors certainly comes under that umbrella at times as well. But certainly the way you can use actors in applied theatre work, or, they don't even have to be actors, actually, in applied theatre work, in a range of applied arts. So it was a term that I coined about 6 or 7 years ago, because we had this term arts and health being bandied around, and it sounded like arts was on one foot and health on the other. And it didn't sit comfortably with me, because it didn't sound like it was doing what we were supposed to be doing. And so I coined the term applied arts and health, because applied theatre had been a term that had been used for a little while before that. So yes, the journal's going very well. It's in its 6th year, coming up to its 7th year. It's gone from strength to strength. We've had some amazing contributions worldwide, and I look forward to continue to receiving those. And Mitchell Kozak is the associate editor from Lesley University in Boston, in Massachusetts. So yes, he and I have seen the baby grow from the very beginning. So thank you for the question.
That's okay. And I might say to all those watching, we'll put a link to that site, so that if you want to find out more details, if perhaps you may want to either subscribe to that publication or even contribute to that publication, you'll be able to do so. But what I might do is, first of all, just take this opportunity to first of all say thank you, Robin, and sorry that Chris couldn't be with us tonight, but thank you for your participation in the conversation tonight and for sharing how you came to write your chapter.
Thanks
so
very much. Thank you. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you, Ross, for also making the effort to be online in the morning in the UK and to join us in this really rich conversation. I'm now going to mention your book in just a moment. Thank you for participating too.
Thank you, Mark. Yes, as you can hear, I've been suffering with the flu, so it's
yes,
something I think I picked up in Australia. Probably.
Apologies for that. So, for all of you watching, again, may I remind you that what you've heard discussed tonight around the discussion around NIDA and the student actor is discussed within this publication about performance, the life of actors. And so if you want to order your copy of issue 13, you can click on the link and that will take you to a separate page, and you can place an order for either a hard copy or a PDF of that publication. So you'll be able to read the article by Robin Dixon and Chris Hay, and so I think you'll find that most engaging. The other thing I mentioned, and I'll just set that up in the window so you can learn about it, is the publication Teaching Actors. And this is the publication by Ross Pryor that you heard him mention, and both of us wave our copies of his book. You can order that on the link that's there. US dollars, it's $28.50. That will give you a link to the publisher for the United States and overseas, which includes Australia. And if you're in the UK, you can order it through Intellect Publishers. So that book, Teaching Actors. So I invite you to take up that opportunity. And finally, reminding you that next week, and in fact next Monday, rather than Tuesday, if you're watching in Australian time, oh, actually, it's not that. I'm going to remove that offer. Next week, on Monday, I'll be interviewing Rowana Mitchell in the UK about the body of the actor and the challenges, particularly of the actors in third year as they prepare for photo shoots, for their show reels. There's a real inclination to suddenly become very conscious of their body and their identity. So I think that'll be a very interesting discussion I'll have with her next Monday. And then next Tuesday, immediately following, will be this one, which I will now display, and that's entitled "Are You in This for the Long Haul?" So on Tuesday, I'll be interviewing Anne Pender and Felix Nobis on their research about the middle years of the acting career and the latter years of the acting career, and we'll hear about how actors maintain that commitment, maintain a viable career in their mid to latter years, and what are the lessons they may learn from that we might learn from them as well. So if you'd like to register for that particular one, you can register online now. But if you go to the website where you registered for this webinar, you'll also be able to register for next Mondays. And of course, if you register, you will receive access to the recording, even if you can't be there for the live program. So thank you for participating with us today. It's been a very rich discussion, and I'm going to conclude the session now. I'll pop up a reminder of what the program is for next. But until next time, stay safe and join me in promoting the well-being of the lives of actors. Thanks for your participation. Bye.